We've just seen two very different versions of how to govern centralized systems, a technocratic versus a legalistic, and I'm wondering if there is a way to meet somewhere in the middle. Whoever wants to grab that one. Shermin, do you want to?
I think what we're seeing is that when Bitcoin first came up and this white paper was published, I think why so many people thought it was fascinating was because it promised a system of complete trustless trust. And the promise was that code can replace human judgment and human bias and information asymmetries, making everything transparent through machine consensus and smart contracts. And that was very attractive in the beginning. So as this technology has matured over time, and we have two big use cases with Bitcoin and with Ethereum now, and in particular with the DAO and the subsequent hard fork that happened, time has shown that theory and practice there is a gap between the theory of trustless trust and the reality of what blockchain-based systems or machine consensus can really, where trustless trust is really, it can meet the promise. I think in the cases where it really gets rid of simple bureaucracy. Blockchains are super efficient in getting rid of bureaucracy. Blockchains are not efficient when they have to address complex governance issues of a group of disparate people with different, with unaligned interests. And especially in the case of, for cases of unknowns. So blockchains are very good in depicting known knowns and known unknowns, and they do that very efficiently. But in this latter case, they're very inefficient. And I think why we have those two extreme approaches. And we will need to do more research and mature this technology before these two approaches can kind of
meet in the middle.
Meet in the middle. We probably need a governance beyond code in the meantime.
I think it's not necessarily a high-level kind of constitutional, do we govern the entire system on-chain or off-chain solution, but for things like smaller, less sophisticated smart contracts, there's definitely room to have oracles that are assigned to an arbitrator or a lawyer. So if the contract comes into this state where there's a conflict, we don't know what to do, then it can just be paused, and a predetermined authority on the outside can actually look at all of the information, make a just decision, and then enter their determination back onto the chain and restart the contract. I think that's one possibility for kind of restoring a human touch to the cold operation of code.
Yeah, I think we have to differentiate here a bit. Blockchain is just tech. We can do with it whatever we want to. The smart contract is just to define those rules. So for example, the governance system you showed here could be written as smart contracts. If you can know who has the signatures, who are the advisors, who are the board members, who are the caretakers, you could all have a key pair, and you could implement this. And of course, then the question is only if you link this directly to the chain. If you just say we have this smart contract system which is implementing exactly this governance, there is some flexibility in providing different bylaws and different things from different keys. But then the question is, do they auto-execute or not? And that's a big gap. Mm-hmm. There we can have the legal system coming in, saying if this auto-execution would not be as intended, then there can be a legal system, normal contracts, where you have some room for how you interpret those results and can make different decisions. Because in the DAO and also in Ethereum, everything is 100% defined, and there is no room for interpretation. If you want to have a different one, the only thing you can do is a hard fork. And this is only okay for very simple contracts. As Shermin said, for example, if you take a multi-sig contract, it works perfectly. I don't know of any case where it did not work. They have a couple of keys controlling money, like 2 out of 3. This is a very simple use case and it's working just fine. The Curator multi-sig, for example, worked perfectly. The DAO was, for example, about 660 lines of code. For developer, it's actually not that much, yeah. But already was too complex for its time, and we didn't manage to write it bug-free.
May I intersect here? The curator, yes, technically it worked perfectly.
Technically, yes.
In reality, we had a few lame duck situations, right? Where we had a 6 out of 12 quorum, or then 3 out of 6. And we had 3 lame ducks in the at some point, and then it was like if the 3 others wouldn't decide, there was no decision. So there are a lot of technical questions, and then you have the non-technical questions.
This is a complete different topic. Yeah.
One of the ultimate goals for IPDB, which we are actually building into the articles of the organization, is that it should aim to dissolve. We should be pushing towards doing things in a totally automated fashion. I think it's great that we're having discussions like this, because it's helping us figure out exactly what it's going to take to make that happen over time.
I would like to point out one of the key differences of the two systems that you propose is like a public blockchain like Ethereum is permissionless in theory, and that makes it so radical in a sense. It's permissionless, anyone can opt in and out at any time. So what you guys are proposing, it's a kind of federated permission, but then the permission comes within. It's much less spontaneous, and it's much more in accordance to our current governance rule sets. So I see that as the biggest bridge to gap, I would say, between the two approaches.
Well, that's not entirely accurate. It's kind of a hybrid between permissioned and a permissionless system, in that anyone can use it, but we have the predetermined validators. So there's kind of a larger stakeholder group that is actively using it, but aren't involved at the validating level.
Okay.
I'll have another question. If I am a user of either Ethereum or IPDB and I'm unhappy as a user, what are my options?
Is there competition that you can switch to?
Yeah.
So I would like to answer the question maybe with an example. So for example, the Ethereum hard fork, right? Vlad is not here. He wanted to maybe come. He's like a proponent of governance by hard fork. And I think, yes, in theory, blockchains, as opposed to nations, they don't have physical limitations, so we can split into 2 different versions. But in reality, we have vested economic interests in those systems. So, it is, I think the theory of, okay, let's create 2 realities sounds, again, great in theory, but the reality is, for example, Ethereum Classic, what can they do? The people who chose to stay on the old chain, there are few developers who support it, there are few economic interests tied to it, and most people had to switch, whether they wanted to or not, because they had vested economic interests, had to switch. And
The economic interest is one thing that we've really tried to avoid with IPDB. So if someone finds themselves in a situation where they're not happy with how the main network is running, they can start up their own network. There's no financial loss to them for doing it, because there's no actual kind of universally agreed value for tokens on the IPDB network. So in theory, someone could start up their own network. It'll talk back and forth between the other networks, and they will be able to run their own show if they aren't happy with the model that we've established.
And there is no loss in network effect if they do so?
They can talk back and forth.
Okay, completely neutral.
Yeah, I actually agree with what Shermin has said. So in theory, if you bring enough people behind you and you're unhappy, you can do a hard fork and go on your own way. But blockchains are about uniting a larger group of people and having a social consensus around it. So I think there are those 3 groups, one rejecting it, opposing it, and then the one saying, I just go with whatever the mass is doing. And so I don't actually know for the DAO hard fork how big this group was, but I think it was pretty big.
Yeah.
So, but it's very hard to give any estimate or numbers on this.
Yeah.
But of course, users can only just say, I don't use the system anymore.
Right.
But that's about all they can do.
Yeah.
And the question is, can we have some user governance? If you would speak as Vlad, if he would be here today,
Yeah.
he's very much for not giving miners control or any other group, but the users are the kings, in his view. So they should control everything. So I would love to see more on-chain governance by users. I just touched a little bit in my talk. This is theoretically possible.
I do have a question, the bomb thing, Vitalik's bomb thing. I mean, this is super centralized, or did I get something wrong?
No,
Basically,
it's the stakeholders, ether holders triggering the bomb. It would be, in case of the DAO hard fork, it would have meant that there is a vote, and if the supermajority is saying, yes, we want to hard fork, then they turn this bomb basically on in 2 weeks' time to hard fork, and then the whole chain just explodes.
Okay.
So this is basically how it works, but it was not dictatorship by any single group, only by the majority of the ether holders. It's just a suggestion to keep united somehow, but I don't know if it would really work, or if the other group would just say we fork to the old version without the bomb or something like this.
So, and I think one of the things you were addressing was very important, minority protection. So how does that,
Yeah.
align with minority protection?
Not
such
at
as
all.
super bomb?
And also the blockchain nervous system does not have any minority protection. Even if you look at other, we didn't touch on Dash, for example. Dash does have some on-chain governance, but that's the same thing. You don't really protect minority rights. But it's similar in big corporates. If you have 51% of the shares in a corporate, you can do mostly whatever you want. And that's a bit similar in those on-chain governance systems where you give coin holders or token holders a vote. It's not really a solved problem.
Do we have any questions in the crowd? Someone want for any or all of them? Yeah?
So I have a question about on-chain governance. I'm kind of skeptical of the whole idea, and the reason I'm skeptical of it is that it carries some opportunity cost. Like, there's only so many times you can come and say, here's a great governance system that we'll deploy, and then it breaks down, and then people lose trust in you. So there's some cost. On the other hand, I don't see how it could work for a system like Ethereum, because in a situation where the participants are anonymous, we see this all over the place. Wherever you have anonymity and market rules determining what happens, then you get the worst possible result. You see worldwide corporations, you see it in many other times. You don't have a way to protect minorities, you don't have a way to defend against cartels. All of these things, Ethereum can't fix, or any on-chain governance can't fix in one go, and the more we try to get systems that address these that fail, invariably, and the more they're corrupted by big money, then the more we lose the trust of the community and of the potential future users. The question is there even a way to start producing such systems that doesn't cause this loss of trust? And is there a way to get this going? Or, can you think of something?
It's a very difficult question. First, we have to ask, what do they govern? Are they governing everything, the whole blockchain, every dApp and every smart contract? Or are they just some protocol parameters, like the block gas limit in Ethereum? Works just fine right now. Like, how much is this group really governing? Is it just very limited control, or do they have a lot of control? That's the first question. And I'm actually for limited control. I don't really like the blockchain nervous system for this reason, because it's omnipotent and controlling everything. I think this is too much. Bitcoin is the other extreme, where you actually have no governance at all, I would say, which has also very good side effects. Like, people trust it to a big extent that the protocol will stay as is, that no single person can do anything. So it has a lot of advantages to not having any governance, but then the disadvantage is you cannot evolve, you cannot change anymore. That's what you also see with Bitcoin. The question is, can we have on-chain governance which is sort of limited only to, for example, some protocol parameters, or not? I think it's a very open question. I do not have the answer. I don't know what's the best, actually.
I think without actually going down the legalistic route, there is a really useful model that we can take from legal systems, which is having a constitution where if you treat certain protocol level stuff as the constitution, that's changeable if you really need to, but it's also very difficult to change. So you really need a lot of buy-in in order to make those changes. And then other things below that, like national laws or local laws that might be comparable to the smart contract level, that are not as important if things go wrong. It's easier to change. It's easier to come up with a totally alternative system. So kind of putting in more flexibility in the levels that are built up on top of this constitutional bedrock is a really powerful option. So I guess the real question is, what do you want in the constitutional level, and what do you want to be flexible? And there's different models for how rigid or how loose do you want the entire system to be.
So I think I fully agree with what you say. There's so much we can learn from the current legal system, because in the end our current legal system is kind of the code, right? And the code, when the code fails, either we have to go through the judicial system to have some kind of arbitrage, whether the truth is on this side or on this side, or we have to upgrade the protocol, which is the law, through the legislative branch. And I think we need to start thinking in those terms also in the more distributed world. And that would be a first step. And decentralize its arbitrage systems, etc. But this also means to acknowledge that code is not the answer to everything. Right? And I think this is what we've seen over the last year, like 2016, with the Ethereum hard fork and the DAO, what happened, but also with the inertia that Bitcoin is currently facing. And also I would say that not having a governance system does not mean that governance does not happen. It happens on the free market, right? So whoever has the most purchasing power or most, the biggest voice in the chat room, they will kind of steer the decision-making process. And this is very obvious, especially in Bitcoin right now.
But yeah, you also want to avoid any single point of failure. So
Yes.
if you think especially for public blockchains now, you want to have it decentralized. You do not want to have a single person or even a group in control of a lot of things. So this makes it very, very hard.
Yeah,
And also people, what I learned from the DAO was, also a lot of people, especially in Ethereum, they don't want to have power. So there was actually a lot of people like, stay one arm length away, I do not want to make this decision, I do not sign anything here. Like, this was actually the real situation. Yeah. So it was not like that we have people like who want to be dictators and say something, it was quite the opposite. So actually, who wants to be responsible for Bitcoin? And especially if you think about it, if you have the opportunity to avoiding something and then don't doing it, gives you also some liability. Let's say, worst case scenario, but there is some accession marketing or some terrorism going on, and you have the power to stop it, but do you want to do it? It's a really uncomfortable situation. So I think the most people would say, as far as I understand, Vitalik and the foundation, they do not want to have the responsibility of what's going on the Ethereum blockchain. Even in the DAO hard fork, the foundation did stay out of this discussion as much as they could, did not make any decision, because they didn't want to. It was also good, they don't have to. And so I think there is not a single party who wants to have this accountability and decision power over a blockchain. So it should come down to users or dev developers or to a large group, which is as a single person kind of not liable or accountable, but only as a group.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But in order for that to really be possible and feasible, we need tools that we don't currently have. We need decentralized communication tools and visualization tools. And we have someone here, and I say you're working on user feed. So one of the problems that we saw in the discussions in the DAO aftermath was there was this wild west of communication on different social media channels. So some were only on Twitter, some were only on Reddit, some were in many worlds, others were writing Medium blog posts. Even within the curator channel, one curator didn't know what the other one had published, right? So there was this complete nightmare of messy communication all over the world. And what we will need in the future is some layers of visualization layers of who said what. And who are the people who said, are they like experts or are they trolls? And what vested economic interests do they have? Is this somebody who holds a lot of Bitcoin or Ether? So we currently have somebody working on that. It's really very interesting what these guys are doing with user feeds. So basically what we need, we're still using communication tools of the Web 2 to steer the Web 3. And what we will need in the future is visualize the vested economic interest and reputation systems of the Web 3, but we don't have those layers yet. So this was something which was really mind-boggling for me. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Yes?
I guess, this is kind of a question related to some of the other discussions. It feels like, let's say for, which groups should have a vote, whatever that might be, whether it should be the whole public or some subset of the app developers. But just for fun, let's assume the public for now, but with that, or any group, I'd love to see you guys explore how much vote should each person get? Should it be one person, one vote? Should it be how much economic stake you have in the system, or how much reputation, or something else? And what is the interplay among that? What are your guys' thoughts?
If you think about what is possible, right now we don't have real identity on the blockchain. So you only have economic stake, actually. That's not, I don't think it's ideal, but I think it's the only thing we really have. Like users, how much transaction fee have they paid, or how much Ether do they have, or how much mining power is someone having, but that's all we have.
Just a quick question, if you had real identity, would that be the ideal? So maybe for this question, assume you have access to real identity, at least in a pseudonymous way.
Good question. I don't know. I don't know.
I think it's a hard question to answer because in the off-chain world, we haven't answered it. Because we live in a world, at least in, let's say, in a country like Germany, in a representative democracy we live in here. We're one person, but as Shermin, I am a citizen and I'm a consumer. As a citizen, I'm one person, one vote. I live in a democracy. At the same time, I'm a consumer each and every second. And as a consumer, I live in a plutocracy. So we haven't answered that question, and currently we're it will be
I think
the same question on chain. Yeah.
There's also a great deal of risk with one person, one vote, in that you wind up with a tyranny of the majority situation, which has financial consequences. But if we're talking about moving society onto blockchains, it has all kinds of very real consequences with other kinds of discrimination as well.
Can you elaborate?
I think, well, for example, if we are voting on what kind of immigration system we want, or what kind of religion we will all follow, or what kind of religions won't be allowed, you wind up where there could be a very unpleasant majority saying very unpleasant things for a victimized minority. And I think whatever system we do wind up building has to take that into account, especially as we start moving more and more toward what people seem to want to have as a direct democracy.
So we probably need a Bill of Rights, on-chain Bill of Rights.
And a way to enforce it that could be a very unpopular elite overruling the decisions of the majority in order to protect a minority. It comes back to the constitutional question.
And I think it comes back to what to govern. Because for me, the blockchain is like a calculator. It just does what it should do. It does no voting on if 2 + 2 is 4 or 5. That doesn't need to be voting, it's 4. And so blockchain should be a bit like this also.
It should be, but currently it is like on the consensus layer. We power it. Like currently we have a proof of work blockchain. So you need money from the off-chain world to buy computational power, hashing power in the on-chain world, and this does translate into power structures.
It does, but I currently still favor to use game theory things and economic incentives, because that's a system which just always works. Because if you give one vote per guy, yeah, you can still game it. You can say pay them for voting and still all those things. So I think having a wide incentive layer is this what did Bitcoin was so successful because it did have a good incentive layer in the beginning. It did work decentralized. But I think this is something I still want to keep. And I do not want to have governance on all single smart contracts and they can vote on shutting them down or not. I think that's actually a bit too much. I think it should still work as a calculator and devs should be responsible for themselves to some extent. DAO, of course, is a very bad example for this, that I'm saying this. But I'm still proposing that we can learn from the mistakes, we can have much better security in smart contracts, making it much simpler, and all of the lessons learned, I mean, much has been written about this, so I don't want to go over this again. But I still think what we have built blockchains for is to have a certain freedom in building a smart contract as you want, and not having it completely governed by someone. That's what Bitcoin was for money. That's what Ethereum is for your smart contracts, what you put in. And I think when I speak about governance, I'm more speaking about the protocol governance, about the technical things, that we move into proof of stake, sharding, and how exactly those things work. I do not think that we need a committee or someone who's governing the dApps working on a blockchain. I think this is something we should avoid, because it's a big mess if you start doing this.
I think protocol governance can wind up, it forms the basis for building these society level applications on top of. And I think that's a great deal of power at the protocol level. And it does it doesn't directly determine the way society goes, but it definitely shapes it. And it creates certain possibilities and closes off other possibilities for what we can build, and therefore how our society can work. So I think there's a lot of power there, and we really need to consider who is in charge and how decisions are being made. And I think it needs to be a bit more than financial interest.
But if you think about the current Web 2.0, the ICANN, for example, do you want them to shut down websites or stuff because they can? I mean, they can just say this IP is not pointing to google.com, or the other way around actually. They can just do everything, but they shouldn't. They should just do their single job, which is very, very limited. And so I think in a blockchain it's a bit similar. I still agree that those governing the protocol, they can make changes which make certain dApps fail. So they actually do have the power to the dApps to a certain extent, but I don't think they should have this directly and actively. It comes by accident, more or less, but it's not something I want to see in a blockchain to have a very strong dApp governance on top of everybody else. But that's still a difficult question.
Yep.
Yeah, I just want to share one observation and hear your thoughts about it. Because if you look at the progress of history and every new technological paradigm, basically brings down old elites and surfaces new elites. That's people who have access to power, to means of production. And now we have the blockchains, where of course we expect them to be this democratizing force, one person, one vote. And now we can vote on the blockchain. But there is, as we look at the situation today, and I'm not saying if it's good or bad, it's just as the way it is. There are new elites, so to say, people who have superior knowledge of how these things work, and other people. Even if I have one vote, I will look up to somebody else who, through their blog post, through their communication, through their authority, will say, okay, we should hard fork or we shouldn't hard fork, and people will follow them because people naturally, it's in the kind of human psyche, people follow authority. And I know that the foundation of Bitcoin is based on and blockchains themselves, decentralized authority. But at the end of the day, even in Bitcoin, there are certain groups that hold the power, and other people look up to them. Do you think that we can avoid that and make it purely democratic vote, or it will naturally come down to certain power structures that will naturally emerge because that's how humans operate? I don't know, I just want to hear your comment on that.
I think it's unavoidable, but you have more accountability because you're on a public blockchain. I think we will end up using something we call liquid democracy, or that you can actively choose the delegates at all time and switch if they act wrong. But you can see on the blockchain what they do, and you will always have people pointing out he did something very dumb, so you should not follow him anymore. But you cannot avoid this, I think, because you cannot expect, if we want to go mainstream with blockchain, you can never expect an end user making a decision on a technical hard fork. Never.
Yeah.
So this is something that should be completely off from his mind. So therefore, but then the question is, do they just all follow Vitalik? And that's it? It's a hard question. How much follower can one guy have or should have? It's difficult.
And I think this belief in expertise is maybe a good thing in some cases. I mean, we've seen a couple of pretty high-profile votes recently where experts were thrown under the bus and told that we don't want those experts running our lives anymore. And we might not even care what facts are. We might choose our own version of reality. So I think creating systems where, like Christoph said, where we can have a very clear line to what the experts are saying, how trustworthy the experts are, it could be very helpful for our democracy.
And I think that I fully agree that, I think the question is how decentralized is decentralized? And we're seeing that decentralization has its limit, and I think the limit is wherever we need expertise, because we still always have to trust the experts, whether it's the design architects of the blockchains or on a DAO level, the experts of whatever we're trying to manage on our DAO. So as the more complex or the more people are governed by a distributed system, the more expertise we will need, because even if we have liquid democracy, it's much more efficient than what we're doing now with like representative democracy of voting every 4 years, but we will still need to trust the experts. We're just more flexible in taking their power away. So getting rid of trust is the biggest myth, I think, of the blockchain. So we have to demystify this. So, yeah.
I'm just curious, out of the crowd here, who has worked with Ethereum or IPDB/BigchainDB? Okay.
Leave your hand up if you have a question.
Yeah, exactly. Now put your hands back down and raise it if you have a question. Yeah.
For Greg, you mentioned that it's the position of IPDB governance layer to dissolve itself at some point. Could you clarify this? Clarify what this means and why that would be the position?
So legally it means that in our articles we say that the mission is to move to a point where the organization no longer needs to exist, either because we have found ways to do governance with a legal body that doesn't require that form of organization anymore, or that the technology has developed to a point where it's more effective to do what we want to do without the organization. So I think the goal is to move away from this central point where really we are incorporated under the laws of Germany, and even though we've tried to spread out the caretaker organizations, if Germany decided they didn't like what we were doing, they could make things very difficult. Or if they decided that any of the caretaker organizations were doing things that another country didn't like, that country could make it very difficult. So we would like to see the database continue. And I think one way to make sure that that happens is to spread it out and get rid of that choke point.
So would that be akin to a pressure towards on-chain governance and away from off-chain governance, just as there are pressures which
I would say we
antithesis?
would move from no on-chain governance to some on-chain governance. I think there will probably still be more people in the loop than you'd see in definitely more than in Bitcoin and probably more than in Ethereum. That's hypothetical for now. I mean, that's years off in terms of planning and technology.
Anyone else? Yeah.
One question regarding the first talk. You said you think it's hard to find a consensus to put all the protocol constants onto a smart contract. But if that would be a part of the hard fork to proof of stake, because in Casper it's like encouraged for miners to get fast block times and to be a good citizen, couldn't that be another vector that is then controlled and be a good part of like an implementation detail for this hard fork?
Yeah, I would hope that we would have at least the last EIP, which is my suggestion, so of course, I hope that this is implemented, but I do not know, that was the last slide, if the current governance model is strong enough to make such a strong decision. Because I currently see they also want to get rid of power. I think actually the foundation in the very beginning also had the goal of not existing or only being a research faculty, not more than this. Not having any control over it. So the question is, can they make a decision which is so strong in terms of governance? I don't know. I would hope to have it in the protocol, yes. But I don't know if it's possible. No.
Anyone else?
Will we have a programming language to write laws somewhere in the future? Like, will we define our laws in like English or German or whatever kind of language, or will they at one point be just like computer programs, because that gives you much better way of defining what you want without ambiguity?
There are a few guys working on that currently here in Berlin. So it's Florian Glatz and Henning Dietrich. They're actually just started a month or two ago. You should talk to them.
They're building a system they're calling Lexon, where you write in a scripting language and compile it, and it spits out a Solidity contract on one side and English binding legal contract on the other side. So I'm trying to decide if I think that lawyers can be trained to write this scripting language or not. I'm hoping I have that much faith in myself and my colleagues, but we'll see. It'll be pretty exciting if they can pull it off.
I have another question. So we've spoken about the models themselves, some of the benefits and maybe areas to improve, but what would you say are the biggest risks in either the Ethereum model or the IPDB model?
Well,
Nothing?
Well, of course there are risks. I mean, risk is if you have a strong governance, let's say IPDB, what do you do if something really bad happens and you could stop it? Let's say there's a lot of child pornography on your database and it's really misused heavily. So those caretakers do have the power to stop it, but then they have a very active job because it's continuing, you actively censor it. It's always the question, where do you draw the line? So if you start having any control, then you always decide, make decisions. If you don't have any control, then it's already decided that everything goes. That I think is a risk. But on the other hand, if you do not have any debt governance, of course there's risk that such things always happen and that you can't do anything about it. And of course, if you have no governance, then the risk is that it's harder to evolve. That you reach a point where you're too big to change. Right now, I think Ethereum is small enough to make changes. If I remember, in the 2 weeks after Ethereum started, we had the first hard fork, but nobody did know about it because we just found out the chain had split by accident. We did about 4 hours to find the bug, 4 hours to fix it, and then we made a phone call to the 3 mining pools, please update your client, it was done. It was in the middle of the night, nobody even noticed the hard fork. Because we are so few people, it's just a community of 10 or 20 people in this case, enough to make this decision on their own in the middle of the night. Today, this hard fork is much, much, much harder. And in 2 or 3 years down the road, I think we will be too big to change. And we will not be able to pull off big hard forks, big changes in the protocol. Only if we use it now to implement some governance, which can make it possible to continue to update. So this is the risk of not having controlled governance. You run into a Bitcoin situation where you just cannot change anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On the IPDB side, I think law is our greatest advantage and also our greatest disadvantage. By putting a stake in the ground and establishing an organization that's actually plays a role in running the network, and having this limited set of caretakers in jurisdictions that have quite a bit to lose. Like, these organizations are established and doing their own thing. I think, like you said, they'll be forced potentially to make choices like this. One of the things that I worry most about is, in a world where we have to think about promotion of terrorist material or child pornography, the one that keeps me up most is copyright. I think Disney would be very upset if say, torrents for Frozen kept showing up on IPDB. And I think that's probably one of the greatest risks and one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about.
Do you want to add anything, Shermin?
Tear us both down.
No, I would like to maybe share another thought because I think everything has been answered. The more I think about blockchains, and I created the BlockchainHub, which means that I'm a fan, right? But the more I understand about how they really work and what the limitations are, the more I ask myself whether what we're trying to create a decentralized world with blockchain, which is actually a very centralized tool around the programming language and around the virtual machine. It's a very centralized tool. So it has the limitations of those known knowns and the known unknowns, and it cannot really depict all the rest. And that's always the messy part of life, on-chain or off-chain. So the more I understand everything, the more I wonder whether we shouldn't create something else, like I now understand why people are researching Futarchy. More spontaneous ways of coordinating, because code always has the limit. It's very efficient when it works, but it always has the limitations of what it depicts. And yeah.
And yes, I agree, it's very centralized. Like Christian Reitwiesner, who is writing a Solidity compiler, it's really a very small group. And if he has a big bug in the compiler, or even a backdoor somehow in every small contract, would be chaos, like everything would fail. Every smart contract. So, because normal users do not have the technical expertise to review the smart contract or review the compiler and then review the code of the client. That's what you usually have to do. But nobody is doing it, and you trust actually a very small group of people that they have done their job right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in reality, public blockchains are not as decentralized as they would like to be because of that very limited expert knowledge. Yeah.
And with time comes more trust. For example, Bitcoin has this limitation that it has a very, very small set of features, actually only one more or less, and you can trust this works kind of because you have this more decentralized, more time. But for Ethereum, we have more goals, and we have much more features, and we have still, compared to the user group, a small group of developers doing it. So I think we are not there yet in trustlessness, so that you really depend on those group of developers. I hope in 5 or 6 years, you have today a lot of different browsers, you have different clients, you have different small contract languages, and then it gets better.
Do we have any other questions in the crowd? Well, I think I'll invite Tim up to give a quick BigChain DB update, and then you're welcome to stick around, have another drink, and continue the conversation amongst yourselves. But I want to give a really warm thank you to our panelists and speakers for coming tonight.